Hello and welcome to Zapier for Beginners. My name is Bill Tucker, and I am so looking forward to showing you all of the amazing things Zapier can do to automate your workflows and make your work life easier. This course will guide you step by step through creating basic Zap workflows while incorporating some more advanced features in these beginner workflows. We'll be introducing Zapier and talking about how the program works and the methodology behind it. We're going to build some single and multi-step Zaps, talk about filters, formatters, and paths, and finally, some advanced functions in AI that can help you get these workflows created even faster. So first, we're going to talk about why Zapier, why utilize this program at all. On average, according to a study, we use 11 applications every day to do our day-to-day work. That is a lot. But the problem is that very few of these apps actually talk to one another. Sure, if you're in a Google environment, your Gmail talks to your calendar, and if you're a Mac user, everything kind of just works together. But what if you use Mac Mail and Google Sheets? Or what if you have Slack at work and Slack doesn't really talk to mostly anything without a lot of configuration and behind the scenes work? See, very few of these apps talk to one another, and as a result, we end up doing loads of manual work. Zapier fixes that problem by taking all the apps that we use every day and serving as a universal communicator that allows all these different applications to talk to each other and automate everyday routine tasks. So here's how it works. The Zapier method. There are 4 different types of functions or features inside Zapier. We have Zaps, triggers, actions, and apps. Zaps are workflows. Think of them as your everyday workflow that contains 2 basic types of functions, triggers and actions. And within this workflow, it essentially says when something happens, do this. The when this happens is the trigger and the action is the action. So in my everyday life, a trigger could be waking up in the morning. An action would be brushing my teeth. Now, my wake-up routine, of course, has many different actions associated with it. I brush my teeth, I make my bed sometimes, get the kids out of bed, etc. And those would be called multi-step Zaps or multi-step workflows, and we'll talk about those as we move forward. But the basic idea is that there are these 2 basic things, our triggers and our actions. When this happens, do this. And our apps are just our programs that we use for everyday life. And in my real life example, that would be my toothbrush, my bed, my kids' bedrooms, and the breakfast that I need to make before we get them out the door in the morning. A work example would be, let's say you get an email from a customer, you may want to update your calendar. The trigger would be the email from the customer, and the action would be to update the actual calendar. And that is what we call a Zap or a workflow. Now that we've discussed how this works in theory, let's take a look at our Zapier dashboard and talk about how everything looks on the site itself. Once you've logged into Zapier, you'll be presented with your basic homepage. There are a few sections here I want to highlight before we move into how to create actual Zaps. The first section is our assets. And our assets is essentially our directory for our created Zaps. So I have one here that I've created. On the side, I'm going to be creating a brand new one from scratch for this video, so you get a sense of exactly how to do this. But this is essentially our directory for everything we create in Zapier. The next section is our Discover section, and Discover essentially gives us lots of information on how to automate different types of work functions like sales pipelines, marketing campaigns, etc., and provides templates. We'll be looking at this a little later in a different video. The third section is our App Connections. This is where we have all of the connections or the actual apps that we're going to be using to create our workflows. Our email, our calendar, our Slack, whatever you happen to use or want to automate, this is where these connections live. And we're going to go through how to create these in a moment. And then finally, our Zap History, which gives us all of our different metrics and statuses for every single thing that's done in Zapier. This is where we go for our troubleshooting and research purposes. So now that we've gone through the essentials on how to navigate our dashboard and what these different sections look like, let's create our first Zap. Now it's time for us to talk about connections and getting our apps set up within Zapier. So to do that, I'm going to go to App Connections. I'm going to add a brand new connection either here or here. And here I'm going to search for an app. Now for this example, for this series of videos, I'm going to be using two different apps. A Google Sheets, where I'm using to track my customers for a fake tech support company where I fix PCs, Tucker Tech Compy Repair Incorporated, and a form that's for new issue registration. So if a customer has a new problem, they can use this form to reach out, give some basic information, and then me in my pretend PC repair shop will assign it to a tech to then reach out and get the issue resolved. So I have a Google form and I have a Google Sheet. So I'm going to be connecting both of these up to Zapier and also an email as well. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to search for an app. So I'm going to say Google. It's going to come up with all the different Google options here. I'm going to start with Sheets, add a connection. And from here, it's going to allow me to pick my account. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my Google account. Whenever you see this in Zapier, always give it all permissions. Now, that may seem scary at first, but Zapier will never do anything to your data or your sheets or your apps that you don't tell it to do. So best practice is always to just select all, let it see everything, even though it has that scary delete in there. Go ahead and click continue. And just like that, I've connected Google Sheets up with my Zapier account. I'm going to do the same thing for forms. So I'm going to say Google again. Google Forms. Add the connection. Once again, choose an account. What's nice about this is you can actually do this across accounts, which is really cool as well. Zapier already has some access, so I'm just going to continue and allow them to manipulate things in my drive. Continue. And boom, just like that. And then the one final thing I am going to add is my email. So I'm going to add my Gmail to this. There's my Gmail. Add the connection. And just like that, select all, give it all the permissions, and hit continue. And just like that, I've now connected all three of my apps to my Zapier account. So now that we have everything connected, let's create our first Zap. To do that, I'm going to go to my home, and I'm going to create a Zap from scratch. Now here I could use AI to describe the workflow and have it figure out some options for me based on my connections. But for me, I'm just going to go ahead and start building a trigger and an action. So the example is, when a customer fills out my form, I want that information to get added to my customer tracker. I want it to get added as a new row. That way I don't have to go into the app, look at my responses, and manually type in all this information. So what I'm going to do is go back to Zapier. The trigger app then is going to be my Google form. So I'm going to select Google Forms. Here now you're going to select what you want to do with these Google Forms. So I have my app Google Forms. I'm going to choose an event, new form response. Now there's some common ones up here. You can of course search the events that are available. I'm going to say a new form response. So when I get a new response, I want this information to go into my Google Sheets. For my account, it's already set up here. That's perfect. So let's continue to the configure step. So now we're in our configure step. We're going to pick a form, and there's a bunch of different forms here available. I'm not going to do my Christmas karaoke party RSVP sheet. I'm going to pick my Tucker Tech new issue form. Go ahead and click continue. And now I'm just going to test my trigger. And when testing triggers, all this is doing is that Zapier is going to validate whether or not it can actually read information from it, and also give you some test data that you'll use to build out the rest of your apps. So I'm going to go ahead and click test trigger. There's a form response that it wants to use. It's the most recent one. If I click on the form response, you'll see that there's some sample test questions and sample test answers. This is probably fine. I'll go ahead and use this for my setup. And just like that, I've now created an actual trigger. So what this trigger again is going to do is that when a new issue is entered into the form, it's going to trigger this action, which is going to be adding that information to my Google Sheet. So now let's set up our action. So now the action here is our Google Sheets. So I'm going to select Google Sheets here. I'm going to choose an event. The event is going to be adding rows. So I'm going to type in add here. And there's create multiple spreadsheet rows. That works fine from my account. So now we're going to go to the configure stage. Now in configure, it's going to ask me what sheet am I adding this information to. So I'm going to do my Google Drive, the spreadsheet. Again, I have lots of different spreadsheet options here, but I'm going to just use my customer tracker. And then which sheet on the tracker do I want to use? I only have one, so I'm going to select sheet 2. Now, once I've selected sheet 2 now, I have all the different options. And it's going to basically ask me, where do you want to put this information in your Google Sheet? So the first thing I have on my sheet here, in my form rather, is the name. So name, I want that to tie to the name column in my customer tracker. So I'm going to go ahead and go to name. What's nice about Zapier is that if I use this /, it's going to give me all of these different options right away to pull from. And it gives me options that are either fields in the Google form or system fields in the Google form itself. So I'm going to go ahead and find name. There's name. Perfect. Email. Email. Now it's coming up with sample text question answer. Not quite sure why it's doing that here, but usually it'll bring up the most recent data that was added to the Google form. But when we test it out, we'll see exactly how it looks. You can also use this plus button to bring up this information instead if you don't want to use the / on your keyboard. Phone number, phone number. Status. What's nice about these Zapier actions is that you don't have to source the information from the Google form itself or from the actual trigger place itself. You can actually free type something. Now for this situation, I want all of my customers that are coming in via this Zap to be labeled as a new customer. And you'll see that here on my customer tracker, I have a status of new customer. So I always want them to come in as new customers. So here, instead of choosing a field, I'm just going to type in new customer. PC and Mac. This is a question on the form. So I'm going to go here and choose PC. For the desk and laptop, is it a desktop or a laptop? Again, desktop. For the operating system, sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. So I'm just going to go ahead and tie it up to that field on the form. Issue from the customer, very important. I get this because this is actually what their question is and what their problem is. So I'm going to go ahead and do what's your issue? And again, all of these different fields line up with fields in my form and in my customer tracker. And the final two things are assign tech and notes. I won't know that right away, so I'm going to leave those blank. I don't need any information from the form for that. And notes are personal notes for my techs. Once I have this all filled out, I'm going to click continue. Okay, what it's going to do now is it's going to pull up some information here, and I'm going to test out the step. And what this is going to do is going to send some test data to my Google Sheet. So when I do test, and if I go back to my Google Sheet, I should now have a new answer. Now it put in this sample text question, probably because it didn't recognize the most recent entry on there, but that's okay because this is all just test data anyway. But as you can see, PC lined up, new customer was added immediately. And just like that, I now have some test data. Now, the final thing I'm going to do here is publish. Here in the lower right-hand corner, I'm going to now publish this Zap, and this will make it live. If I want to make any changes, I could then change the configuration and then retest, but everything looks good so far, so I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And just like that, our Zap is live. It is on a version V1, and it is now going to respond. And that's it. That's how easy it is to create a Zap from scratch in our Zapier account. I'm going to go ahead actually and rename this real quick. That way it's a little different from the demo I was doing earlier. And now we can go in here and take a look at what this looks like. Next, we're going to move on and create some multi-step Zaps. But before we do that, this might be a good chance to pause the video, jump into Zapier, and see what you can make for yourself. I'll be here waiting for you when you get back, so play around with the system, and I'll see you when you return. All right, welcome back. Hope you were able to create some really cool Zaps on your own and can see how powerful and easy to use Zapier is. Big fan of it myself, so glad you're back with me. So now let's talk about multi-step Zaps, because in life and in work, one trigger usually doesn't trigger one action, it triggers multiple actions. So here we're going to talk about how to create a multi-step Zap. And for our example today, what I want to happen is when a new response is entered in onto the Google form, not only do I want the record to be added to the Google Sheet, I want an email to be sent to the customer thanking them for reaching out and letting them know next steps. What I'm going to do here is add a new action. Now, before I continue, while we were gone, I went ahead and did a new form response. So I now have real data in here from Jimmy Fallon. He is a customer, I guess, of my fake repair shop. You can see here that his information was added via the Zap properly here. So that's perfect, working as expected. So now what I want to do is I want this customer to get an email once I send this Zap off to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new step. I went into the Zap and I hit edit ahead of time. I'm going to add a Zap. And now I'm going to add a new action. And this new action is going to be associated with my Gmail. So the event here, I'm going to choose the event. I'm going to type send an email. And now I'm going to continue to the configure section. And here I'm going to put in exactly what does this email contain and where's it going to go. So for 2, I'm going to click on the plus. I'm going to send it to the email address that was associated with my previous action. If I want to CC somebody, I could do that. In this situation, I'm going to BCC myself just so I can actually take a look at the response. Again, you wouldn't want to do this outside of testing because then you would get BCC'd on every single email that was coming your way. But again, this is an example of you don't have to use the fields in the Google Forms or your source trigger. You can actually use really anything. So I'm just going to put that email in there just to BCC myself so you can see the results of the output. Okay, the from is going to be from that email address, from name, Tucker Tech. Reply to, I'm going to skip. I don't really need that right now. The subject is going to be simple. Thanks for your submission to Tucker Tech. The body type is going to be plain. You can also do HTML. So if you really want to create a beautiful email response, you can do that with HTML. For our purposes, though, we're going to do something pretty plain. Now, what's nice about using the plain text, you can still use wildcards and fields to fill this out. So I'm going to say, good day, wildcard, which is the /, and then select the person's name right there from the Google form. Thanks for reaching out to Tucker Tech regarding your, now here I want to also say PC or Mac. So I'm going to use the PC wildcard. Right there. Beautiful. Member of our tech team will be reaching out within the next business day. And then thanks for choosing Tucker Tech. Boom. Easy. Simple little message, just letting the customer know we got their request. You can add a signature if there is one associated with that Gmail account. You can also include attachments if you want to include other forms, add labels. So if you really desperately want to make this important, you could. I probably wouldn't do that because then it would all show up in there important. But hey, you never know. And then from there, I'm going to click continue. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is test this step. This will actually send it to this person. So make sure that if you are testing, that you are testing against fake data. I'm BCC'd. I'm gonna test this step. And just like that, a message was sent to Gmail. So if I go into my Gmail account, and there it is. Thanks for your submission to Tucker Tech. Good day, Jimmy Fallon. You can see it has the name already added, the PC's already added, and I could have added more wildcards here to show you really how that works in a very visual way. So that is how to do multi-step zaps. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about are filters. Now, filters allow you to add conditions to this form. So for our example, let's say, for example, that if a customer on the form chooses other, I don't want to get an email. I don't want them added to the form. I wanted to basically pretend like it doesn't exist. And the reason is I don't work on Linux. I don't work on smartphones. I don't work on toaster ovens. I only work on PC and Mac. So if they choose other, I just want them to filter out of the sheet completely. Now, I know in a real world example, we'd want to give them some feedback. We'll talk about that in a second when it comes to paths. But for now, we're just going to set up this filter so nothing happens at all. So I'm going back to Zapier, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a filter between the form and the sheet. So I'm going to click on Add Step, Flow Controls. This is the first time we've been in here, and a filter. So this is going to allow the Zap to proceed only when a condition is met. From here on the right-hand side, we're going to configure our filter. Only configure if the PC field, PC or Mac field, does not contain other. If the PC or Mac field contains other, I do not want to continue. It's a little backwards logic. But again, you can use a variety of different filters to make this filter. And this works very similarly to Excel or Google Sheets filters. If you used those before, you're already an expert. I can also add additional filters as well, but I'm just going to stick with this one. Hit continue. And the Zap that we had continued originally with the original test data would have continued with this test data. It would have put in that information. But now, if someone fills out the form with other as their option for a PC or Mac, it will not proceed. It will completely stop the workflow and stop it in its tracks. And you're going to see this much more powerfully as we move forward with different options. Now would be a great time to go into that Zap you created earlier, create some additional actions to that trigger, and maybe even a filter or two to see how that works. Go ahead, play with it, come on back, and we'll continue with how to use the formatter function, paths, and some scheduling options. All right, welcome back, and hope you were able to use some filters and create some additional functionality for your Zaps. Now, while you were gone, I went ahead and added a new column to my sheet here, which is date received. And the reason I did that is I want to capture when did I receive the actual request to get the work done from the customer. And I went ahead and manually filled in all the old data, but I had a new customer come in, Mr. Ferguson, and notice how the date coming in is crazy. It's got the actual timestamp. It's in a weird year, month, day format. It's in 24-hour time. I'd like that to transform into a date that's a little more readable to me on this sheet. And to do that, we're going to use the formatter function in Zapier. So going back to Zapier, I've edited my Zap. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a new step after the filter, which is going to be called under formatter. And what the formatter does is it allows you to format 4 different types of data. So from here, I'm going to choose an event. These are the 4 different types of data I can manipulate. I can manipulate the date, time, numbers, text, or even utilities, which are choosing values from a list or looking up in a table. For our purposes, I'm just going to do a date time format. So once I choose that, I'm going to continue. I'm going to transform a value. So what this is basically saying is, once I reach this step in the workflow, I need to transform that date into something more readable. So I'm going to transform. I'm going to do a format for formatting a date. Which text do I want to format? I'm going to format the create time. This create time comes from the Google form itself. This is not a field that I added to the Google form. This is just something that happens and it's part of the Google Forms ecosystem innately. So I'm going to do create time. That's the input. I'm going to change it to, so let's use this one. Let's use the month, day, year. That'll match up with what I have currently in my sheet. Time zone, I want that to stick to central. Now the from format, this is not required. It will assume the from format if it doesn't know it already. I'm going to leave that blank for now and just hit continue. And now any date that comes in, any input that comes in is going to go from that time to that time as well. And if I go ahead and test the step, it's going to transform the data, and the output right here is exactly as expected, 02/18/2026. Now, of course, that's not going to update the record in the sheet. I'll have to do that manually, but going forward, any new information added to that sheet will respect the new data. So now let's talk about paths. Now, throughout this entire conversation, you may be thinking, what are you doing with all of these customers that want to work on their smartphones and work on Linux? You're just completely filtering them and removing them from your data set. And you're kind of right. The best thing to do for this use case would be to use a path instead of a filter. So that's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this filter. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots, delete. It says, you're really sure you want to delete? Yes, I can. There is an option to undo this if you want. Instead of a filter, I'm going to add a path. So I'm going to click on add a step, and I'm going to add a path. It gives me a warning that if I add a path to this location, all the steps below will be moved to the first path. That's fine, no problem whatsoever. Let's add that path. And now instead of having a filter, I now have 2 options for the conditions. So the first condition here is basically the same as the filter. So if I click on the path condition, if the PC Mac field does not contain other, then move forward with adding them to the Google Sheet and sending them an email. Beautiful. Here it's saying that the path would not have continued for the test data that I included. Oops, oh, sorry, I forgot to put other. That's why you test it. That's why you test it. Hey, go back in there. Let's retest it. And now it would have gone through for that. Perfect. Now that's path A. Path B is going to be, what do I do if it actually is other? I want to actually do something with the data. I just don't want to ignore it completely. So I'm going to go to the path conditions. Once again, field. If the PC or Mac field contains other, then I want to do something else. I want to do a new set of actions. This path would not have continued for the test data. Perfect. And this is exactly what we want. The path would not have continued for this test data. So what action do I want to do? Well, I still want to add them to the Google Sheet, right? I still want to go forward and make sure they're located. But what I probably want to do is on the Google Sheet, I'm going to add another, create multiple spreadsheet rows. I'm going to do the full reconfigure again, but this time, instead of adding them to the sheet as a new customer, I'm going to add them as declined or blocked. Customer tracker, worksheet 2. And here, instead of doing that action, I'm going to actually probably put them in as a status of declined. That way they still show up on my data set, but I can reach out to them with marketing material. Hey, if you do have a computer that's not Linux, we'd be happy to work on it with you. And then the final thing would be to create another step for Gmail and send them an email saying, hey, thank you for your business. Thank you for reaching out, but we do not work with Linux laptops. We don't work with smartphones. So as you can see, the two different conditions allows you to really branch out and make your workflows truly dynamic based off of certain conditions. Now let's talk about how to use delay and scheduler within our Zapier workflows. Now, it doesn't make a ton of sense in our example here where we would want a customer to get an immediate response. Let's just say for some reason we wanted to delay that for whatever reason. Maybe we want to review things by a person before they actually get the email response. Maybe we want to actually make sure it's not spam. Maybe there's a reason we want to set a delay in place for these customer responses. So what I would do here in my workflow is I'm going to edit my draft. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a step between the sheets and the email, go to flow controls, and set in a delay. And what the delay allows you to do is basically exactly what it says. You can delay after a queue, you can delay for a certain set amount of time, or delay until an actual action happens that would then prompt the review or prompt this action to take place. I'm going to do delay for sake of ease. We're going to configure that. You can delay it for minutes, hours, or days. Here I'm going to put in the amount of time I want it to be delayed for, so I'm going to delay it for 30 minutes. You can also use a field to do this if you like. Continue. And here we are. It's going to be delayed for 30 minutes until that gives me a chance to review this entry and make sure it's something valid I want to move forward with. This delay can also be, again, used for queues. It can also be based off of actions, so you can then add human touch points into your Zapier workflows, but we'll cover some of that in a later video. You can also schedule things as well. So for example, now scheduling in our example doesn't make much sense because we want these to be instantaneous. You can do things like get weekly reminders in Slack, or you can send daily emails based off of certain information or certain parameters. The scheduling function is really powerful and can be utilized to schedule tasks that you would normally automate or do yourself. Now let's talk a little bit about some of Zapier's AI features. Now there's two places in Zapier where AI really shines, and there's multiple places where AI works in Zapier, but there's two main places I want to feature it. Firstly, it's in this home page where I could ask Zapier to simply create a Zap based off of a natural language prompt. And I can do that right here on the home page in the Copilot section. So let's say, for example, I want to create a Zap that assigns anything that's a PC to Joey and anything that's a Mac to Sarah, because Joey is my PC expert and Sarah is my Mac expert. So I'm going to start with a sentence. Create a Zap that assigns records in my Tucker Tech Google Sheet to Joey if it's a PC, or Sarah if it is a Mac. Boom, I'm just going to start there. Of course, it also gives you a number of options and suggestions below, but I'm just going to start here. And what's nice about this is as this kind of cooks and starts looking into it and starts actually thinking, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different options you have as this is working. So here I found my Google Sheets with the correct actions. It found the trigger. It found a route. It's going to do some paths here. It's going to update the assignment column with the appropriate person. It looks like it found everything I need. So let's continue with the editor and watch the magic happen. So here on the right-hand side, you're going to see now everything is being set up, and you can actually just watch this work. And as this is cooking and working, I'm going to point out some features that it contains. It's going to do the authentication against the Google Sheets account. Just so you know, once in a while, it will ask you to do things on the left-hand side. So always keep an eye on the AI as it's working, because it may need more input from you as it's doing the work required. I also had it last time I tested this, where it asked me to revalidate the Google Sheets and my Google account. That's no big deal. You just hit the button and it does everything for you. Looks like it found the tracker, it's finding the worksheets, which is perfect. And you can also see on the right-hand side here as well, everything updating as it goes. And this is actually creating the Zap from scratch for us to use right now, which is really nice. All right, so now it's asking me a question to verify. It's asking me, can I verify the exact name of the Tucker Tech spreadsheet? All right, so I'm going to do, whenever I work with AI, I always try to be really specific, and I try not to be too nice too. For some reason, I'm always, please do this nice thing for me. I was told once by an AI expert, don't be nice to the AI. I'll try to be nice to the AI when I'm talking to him. So it got the exact name correct. So that is the correct sheet. Let's see. I only answered the first question and hit the enter key too fast. Let's see what it comes up with. Okay, it needs a little more information. So the columns that are in the Tucker Tech sheet. So let's take a look at my sheet. And it needs to know what columns are there. I'm only concerned about the assigned tech column based off of the PC or a Mac column. So let me let the AI know that. It's the PC/Mac column. All right, well, so now the exact name for the device type, and the values indicate PC versus Mac. Should be enough for the AI to finish up the work. I like how you can actually see the AI thinking as well as actually asking you questions. I think that's a really cool feature. Also, as it's working, you'll sometimes see checkpoints, as you can see right here. Found an invalid path, so looks like I may have to resolve that in a minute. Oh, there it goes. Now it's adding the path, as you can see here. If the AI starts going off the rails, you can always go to these checkpoints and revert back to a checkpoint. Once the AI makes big decisions or big changes, it puts almost a restore point in the process. So if you notice it going off the rails, you can always just go revert back to that step, stop the AI, and then see why it went off the rails in the first place. And now it's adding all of the update rows and the update information to the different paths. And it's also added the path conditions. Now it looks like the update row action didn't have direct common field, so it's going to probably try again with a different tactic. And there you go. It looks like it didn't understand assigned tech, which is in here, and that's here. So I'm curious. I can just let it know column J is the column it needs to update. But let's see if it finds it on its own. But as you can see, the AI really does a great job of putting together and logically creating Zaps on its own. It does a really nice job of it, of taking out a lot of the manual labor in creating Zaps. All right, so the assigned tech field, I don't know why it couldn't find it, but it is J. I hope that was right. Yes, it was column J for assigned tech. Again, I may have misspelled assigned tech at some point. I'm not quite sure what happened. I already did that. Oh, latest message. Sorry, I just gave it a single letter answer and it did not like that. The assigned tech column is column J on the Google Sheet. It's only seeing A through G on the sheet. That's very interesting because there's way more than that. Remember too, when you're setting up prompts, unlike my single sentence prompt, the more detail you can give the AI, the better. So it would eliminate some of this back and forth. So if I had said, make sure it points to column J in the Tucker Tech Compy customer tracker, it might have had a better time at figuring it out. But the nice thing about it is you do get this dialogue back and forth. So now what I'm going to do is go into an old Zap, the one I created earlier. I'm going to my assets, going to my new customer Zap, which is the one I created earlier. And now I'm going to use AI to do the exact same thing in an existing Zap I've already created. So I'm going to edit this Zap. I'm going to pull up the AI helper. There's Copilot here at the lower right-hand corner. And I'm going to basically say the exact same thing. If a customer request goes through path A, which means it's either PC or Mac, I want to assign it to Joey if it's a PC, or assign it to Sarah if it's a Mac. Because again, Joey's my PC expert, Sarah is my Mac expert. I think that's pretty clear. Now, it already has all the references to the sheets, so I don't think we have to worry about that too much. I'm also going to specify exactly how I want it done. I want this done with a new path within path A. All right, let's see how it does. Perfect. There we go. Excellent. So it now has the right idea. We want a nested path within path A that branches based on PC versus Mac. So we're going to edit the existing draft. Perfect. So the issue is that you already have Google Sheets and Gmail steps in path A. Yes, that's perfectly fine. So it's going to restructure it. That's no big deal. And now it's going to create the actual paths. So we had our first path, and now we have our new path, and we have our new path A and path B with new actions. And it's going to go ahead and reconfigure all of those options. And as you can see, it does a lot of work in the background to make sure that this process works properly. It's getting all of its worksheet details. Now, obviously, AI isn't perfect, and you're always going to want to review the data once it comes across, but a lot of this initial setup can be done for you at basically the click of a mouse, and with a really good prompt, you can get 80% of your work done just by letting AI do its thing and create the zaps for you. Okay, it looks like it's configuring the two separate branches now, which is great. And I'll probably have to re-add the send email as well. Also, when you're looking at it on the sheet itself, it'll show you where it's working by highlighting it here on the actual workflow itself. All right, looks like both of them are good, so we're going to go ahead and test it. Let's test these out using the test data that's already stored in the Zap itself. And now we're going to test the Mac branch. All right, it gives me our results. It's all properly configured and tested. Path AA, which is the PC branch. Path B is now the Mac branch. And then if I want to use AI to copy over these Gmail accounts, I could do that as well, or the Gmail steps, I should say. But for now, let's move on to some other topics. And finally, let's talk a little bit about some best practices and troubleshooting tips that you can use when building out your Zap workflows. One of the biggest things I recognized when I was working with Zapier for the first time is data management and data positioning, especially when you're working with forms or tables. Now, if you start incorporating Zapier tables or Zapier forms, this becomes less of an issue, but especially when using external sources, it's really important to understand where your data goes and how that reflects in your Zapier workflows. Now, initially when I added this date received column, I initially thought, oh, this is just going to slot in. I'll add a reference to this in the actual workflow and have the data added from the form itself. But the problem was that when I added this column and went back to the Zapier, it took all of this information and moved it around. It moved the status to PC, the PC to desk laptop, et cetera, and pushed everything off. So if you're adding columns to your sheets, make sure you add it at the end. That way you can just go to the end and assign the value from there. Otherwise, you run the risk of it pushing all of your values, forcing you to do all that work again. Just be mindful of that when you're working with data within the Zapier workflow. Another best practice is to utilize the error handling. Zapier will not let you publish a Zap that it thinks isn't ready. So for example, you'll see here on this delay, I never finished setting it up, so I have this little button here, this little informational button. If I click on that, the status comes up on the left-hand side, and you can see that it'll tell me exactly what the problem is. It says it hasn't been tested, and I'm missing some required fields. Also, if I click here in the paths as well, this path isn't complete for the very same reason. So it's really useful to use and to keep an eye on, because as you begin working on more complex Zaps, you will absolutely run into errors. This is where those errors are handled and can be looked at and handled appropriately. Another place to go is if you go back to your home and go to Zap History, you can see every single Zap that's gone through, the tasks associated with it, and whether it was successful or not, and drill down into those individual options. You can even see detailed run details and the bare data that went through it. Really useful for troubleshooting Zaps to see exactly how they're performing and what they are doing in the background. And as you move forward at Zapier and continue making automations, you are going to want to learn how to organize them. Your assets section is exactly where you do that. The last thing you want is to have multiple Zaps sitting out there. You can have dozens of Zaps running concurrently. You always want to make sure you organize them properly with folders using the Assets Manager. Just create folders and organize away. And finally, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about publishing, testing, and versioning within the Zapier system. Testing is extremely important because it allows you to step by step make sure that all the different components of your Zap work as expected. Now you can skip the test, which is a nice feature if you know that whatever changes you've made is not going to affect the final product. But before you publish, it's always a good idea to test. So let's say, for example, I do something like change what data are going to which rows. So if I double click on here, I'm gonna go to my configure and I make some changes. Let's say, for example, instead of name, I do, let's pick something that makes a little bit of sense. Let's say our notes, for example. Let's say we're gonna put in a notes column, and just for the sake of example, we're going to add the issue here as well. Again, this could be a brand new field. Maybe on your source customer tracker, you've added something new that you now want the system to look at. When I click continue, the system is automatically going to see if you want to test a step. And you'll see here at the bottom, retest step. Now, to do manual testing, I can go to any one of these options and test the actual step by going here to test in the upper right-hand section and retest the step. And the beautiful thing about retesting is it gives us brand new data to see and make sure that what we're looking for actually happens. Now remember, every time you test an actual data flow, it actually does the data flow itself. So this is not dummy data, this is live stuff. So if you're testing email notifications, for example, do keep in mind that the data you're sending is going to go to that email address. To mitigate that, you can go to your main source here, the main trigger, go to configure, and pick a new record type. If you click find new records, the system will pull up any new records that were in that source data source. And then you can pick one that is more dummy data. And as you can see here, this one obviously issue and operating system's all gobbledygook. So this might be really good data to use if I'm attempting to test out some new features. That way I'm not sending emails to real people or affecting live data. Another feature I want to point out is versioning. This is extremely important when you're working with Zaps. If I click here on the version, you'll see every version of this Zap that I've created since the very beginning is saved here. This is every published version that exists. So let's say, for example, in version 7, I discover an error. It wasn't picked up by the testing. It's a data mismatch of some sort. Something is not working properly. I can roll back to any one of these 6 different versions, all the way to the very first one, if you remember our very first Zap. And look how quaint that looks. That looks really quaint when it comes to the Zaps that we've built just in this hour-long video. It's pretty impressive. So feel free to feel good about that as you're exploring your history. So let's say, for example, I wanted to go back to this version. Version 7's not working. My customers are freaking out. My sales reps are freaking out. They want to make sure I got to roll this back and see what happened with version 7. The best thing I can do is click here, click on the 3 dots, and select edit from this version. And what that's going to do, it's going to make a new draft based on version 6, and then I can just turn around very easily and publish this version as a brand new version. So I'll click publish here. I'll name this V8 or whatever I want to name this version. I just use the V's. It just makes sense to me, but you can name them if you have build numbers or build IDs, you can do that as well. Click publish. It's going to publish to Zap. And now my old version has been officially rolled back, and now version 7 is no longer in use. So this is really important if you are working with Zaps that a lot of people use and you discover an error or an issue. You can always go back to the original one or to a previous version very quickly, very easily. And finally, let's just talk about publishing. Publishing is how we get our Zap to the world and how we get our Zap in place, live, ready to go to start processing data. As you saw earlier, once I hit the last section, if I edit my Zap, upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that the publish button is here in the upper right-hand corner next to test run. Again, test run will test the entire Zap based off of the most recent data that you've added as your testing data. The publish button will, of course, send it to the world. So once again, if I go here to the Gmail, and let's say I just change this from name to Tucker Tech Experts, okay, and I go continue, it'll allow me then to publish those suggestions. But again, you always want to make sure you're doing your test run before you publish out anything. And of course, a test run will send an actual test to your Zap. Notice once I click test run, it's going to select which row to test. Again, it's giving me the opportunity to select the data that I want to test from. I'm going to do it off of this one here because I know this Craig Ferguson. He's not really a customer of mine. So I'm going to click test run. And you'll see here that it's running the actual test itself. And you can track its progress throughout the workflow as it's continuing to complete its work. The test ran successfully, which is perfect. I can look at the run details by clicking on the 3 dots and selecting View Run Details. And here on the right-hand side, you'll see exactly what is submitted and the output generated. From there, I can reselect Edit Draft and then publish my changes here. And there we go. And that just about does it with our session on how to create basic Zaps with some advanced features. In this session, you learned how to create basic single-step and multi-step Zaps. You learned how to organize those Zaps in your assets folder, how to make the connections, how to set up different triggers and actions, and use AI tools to make everything all the more easier for you. If you enjoyed this training session, be sure to check out our other ones. And as always, thank you again for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.